All right, you guys, let's talk a little bit about experimental design. So how are we going to design our experiments? Well, for starters, anytime we want to design a statistical study, first and foremost, we have to identify the variables of interest. All right, so what are we going to focus our study on? We also need to think about what is our population going to be. Okay, so again, what are we going to focus on? What are we going to measure? And what's the population of the study? We then need to develop a detailed plan for collecting our data. All right, so how are we going to collect our data? Are we going to use things like a survey, or are we going to make observations? Are we going to try a simulation? Right? If we use a sample, we want to make sure that the sample is representative of the population. Then, of course, we need to collect the data. We then need to describe the data using descriptive statistics. So we want to get an idea of how our data looks. And then lastly, we want to interpret the data and make decisions about our entire population of interest using inferential statistics. Okay, so again, identify the variables of interest, develop a detailed plan for how we're going to collect our data, then actually go about collecting the data. Then we're going to do some basic descriptive statistics, so describe how our data looks. And then lastly, we are going to interpret the data and make inferences about our population. And then lastly, we always want to be able to identify any possible errors. Have we made any mistakes? Do we have any biases? All right, so let's talk about different ways we can collect data. First, there's an observational study. Okay, so this is when a researcher observes and measures characteristics of interest that are a part of a population. All right, the researcher does not, and let me grab my pen here so you guys make sure you read this word. The researcher does not attempt to manipulate or influence the variables of interest. This is when we are literally sitting in the airport people watching. Okay, and of course it doesn't have to be an airport. I'm just using that as the perfect place to people watch. But here, again, the researcher's not doing anything. He or she is literally observing the characteristics of interest of part of a population. Right? Researchers observed and recorded the mouthing behavior on non-food objects of children up to 3 years old. Okay, so here's a study that came out of Pediatric Magazine. Okay, so the researchers just observed and then recorded what they saw in terms of the mouthing behavior of these children. Okay, so observational study. All right, let's think about an experiment. A treatment is applied to part of a population and responses are observed. Okay, so here we're actually using a treatment and we are applying it only to part of a population. All right, so what would be one example here out of diabetes care? An experiment was performed in which diabetics took cinnamon extract daily, while a control group took none. After 40 days, the diabetics who had the cinnamon reduced the risk of heart disease, while the control group experienced no change. Perfect example of an experiment. Okay, we see this a lot, especially with anytime we see SAT prep results being reported. A lot of times they'll say, these students went through an SAT prep course, these students over here did not. Let's compare the results. All right, so that would be an example of an experiment as well. All right, we can always have a simulation. This is going to use a mathematical or physical model to reproduce the conditions of a situation or process. And here I say often involves the use of computers. I mean, this would be 999 times out of 1,000, this is going to involve the use of computers. Okay, so when are we going to use a simulation? We're going to use a simulation when it's just downright impossible for us to really measure our variable of interest for our population. So we'll see an example of that here in just a minute. But just think, when we cannot measure it in real life, we're going to reproduce it using computers in a mathematical or physical model. Okay, so Automobile manufacturers use simulations with dummies to study the effects of crashes on humans. Now, we can't really just strap some humans and some minivans and then plow those minivans into a bridge or off of a bridge or etc. So we're going to have to use crash test dummies. All right, and lastly, we can always have a survey. This is an investigation of one or more characteristics of a population, and almost always this is going to be done by interview, mail, telephone, or internet. Obviously, hopefully next week you guys will be doing my pre-course survey where I'm asking you guys some information about, how you feel about the course already, what's your background in statistics, etc., etc. Okay, a survey is conducted on a sample of female physicians to determine whether the primary reason for their career choice is financial stability. All right, clearly this is just a survey. All right, so let's take a look at an example. All right, so let's consider the following statistical studies. Which method of data collection would you use to collect data for each study? All right, pay attention through this because this is a lot what the problem set in my stat lab is going to look like this coming week. A study of the effect of changing flight patterns on the number of airplane accidents. Okay, so we're looking at changing flight patterns. We're looking at the number of airplane accidents. Is this something we can observe? Is this something we could actually do an experiment on? Is this something where we want to use a survey? Or is this something where we'd want to run a simulation, possibly using computers? Well, here we clearly want to use a simulation because it's absolutely impractical and impossible to create this situation. We can't cause airplane accidents, guys. So we're going to have to use computers here to run a simulation. A study of the effect of eating oatmeal on lowering blood pressure. Well, what do you think? Do we want to use a simulation? That would be very difficult because do we really have a mathematical model for how oatmeal affects blood pressure? Do we want to use a survey? It's possible. Do we want to just make an observation? Or could we actually design an experiment here where some people eat oatmeal for a certain amount of time and others do not, where all of them have high blood pressure? Yeah, that sounds like our best bet. Let's do an experiment where we're measuring the effect of a treatment, i.e. eating oatmeal, and how it affects lowering one's blood pressure. All right, a study of how 4th grade students solve a puzzle. All right, we want to study how 4th grade students solve a puzzle, so what would we want to do? We'd want to watch them, right? We would want to watch how they actually go about solving a puzzle. So what of our 4 data methods involves watching, observation? Let's do an observational study here where we observe and measure certain characteristics of how the 4th grade students are solving a puzzle. All right, and then lastly, a study of U.S. residents' approval rating of the U.S. president. All right, well, we want to get an idea of how all the U.S. residents feel about a particular president. So what are we going to do? We're going to grab some of them and ask them the question. All right, and so this is going to involve a survey. All right, we'll randomly sample some people and ask them, do you approve of the way the president is handling his job? Okay, so again, just a survey here.